Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 639 of the Juicebox Podcast. Nicole is on the show today to tell her story. She is a registered nurse who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes during the pandemic. She learned a lot about what hospitals and nurses know about diabetes and a lot about what she thought she knew. Get ready to have fun with Nicole. She's really wonderful. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Are you a type 1 too, like Nicole? Do you live in the United States? Are you the caregiver of a type 1 who is a U.S. resident? If you are, oh my, is that good news? Because that makes you eligible to take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. The survey is quick and simple and easy, and it helps people with type 1 diabetes. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is brought to you by Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod DASH and the Omnipod Promise. Learn more today at omnipod.com/juicebox. The podcast is also sponsored by Touched by Type 1. They're a diabetes organization out there doing good work for people with type 1, and all they want is for you to check them out. They're at touchedbytype1.org, and they're on Instagram and Facebook. This is going to test my skills today, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I bet. It sounds like you've had an overwhelming last 24 hours.
Yeah, I kind of have. Oh my God. You are a nurse, right?
Yeah, I'm a registered nurse.
Yeah. Have you ever worked in a hospital setting?
Yeah, I did up until my diagnosis. So I had 15 years at our local hospital here.
Oh, wow. So we're not recording yet, but I just dropped my mom off at her apartment and watched her barely be able to get into bed and just kind of flop down. It was, and I sent a message to my brothers and I said, listen, we have to talk because I don't think if things stay like this, mom can't take care of herself.
Exactly. Yeah. And even just the basic of bladder infections takes so much out of the elderly.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. And she's, she was getting by before, but now if she doesn't get hungry or doesn't remember to keep drinking, then she just lapses right back into the same problem again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's really something. And my mom never my mom and dad didn't exactly save money and take good care of themselves. And now she doesn't have any money. So she's looking at basically going to a place, whatever place will accept, her social security check in exchange for living there, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering how that works in the States, because of course our medical systems are somewhat different here in Canada. But yeah, we do have government funded care homes here in Canada as well. And then otherwise the ones you pay for are extremely expensive. They're minimum $5,000 a month.
Yeah. Right. I don't know who's paying for that. So
yeah,
and it's certainly not her, and
yeah,
you're just like, wow, this is crazy. And not only that, but you start looking at her age and you're doing the math and you're like, oh, this is it. This is the last few years of her life.
Oh,
it just feels that way. And,
yeah,
and I'm sure it's possible she could just pop back up a week from now and be like, I feel better. But
definitely, it's definitely possible.
Yeah. At the moment, it's just, I don't know. But aside of her, it made me feel like, oh, hell. It's like, first of all, I've always seen life as like a group of people in a line standing at a cliff and just, yeah. You're like one goes off like a lemming and you're like, I'm one person closer to having to walk off this cliff, My mom was the last person in front of me. So
yeah, totally. That's an interesting way of looking at it. But yeah, I guess it's very true.
like, oh my God, I'm next. And I said to my wife this morning, I was like, so basically your childhood is just bullshit. Like, when you're by the time you get to a certain age, you don't even remember being a kid. It's almost,
right,
meaningless. And so that's like a proving ground situation. You find out if you're strong enough to stay alive, and you're not going to cry all the time, or drop dead from appendicitis. Now, okay, I'm in my 20s. I said, you basically have from like 25, when your brain really solidifies, to maybe 45, the first time you think, why does my knee hurt for no reason?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's like your whole life right there. 25 to 45.
It is, yeah.
There's the
I'm getting to that point. I just turned 38, and yeah, it's like, wow, I'm kind of achy when it rains. That's a new sensation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm my assumption is, and by the way, now I've realized I'm probably leaving all this in the podcast, but
yeah, that's okay.
But now I've realized, like, it's the cooking part in the beginning, the living part in the middle, and the dying part at the end. You're basically, there's 1/3 of your life is like really great.
Yeah, and you better make the best of it, right?
Holy hell.
Yeah.
I said to her, I was like, Kelly's like, what do you think about all this? I said 2 things. A, we need to retire as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I was like, and B, we need a suicide pact in case one of us can't take care of ourselves. I was like, we've got to decide when it's time to go, and really agree on it up front, because now I talk to my mom and I'm like, it's not even like, it's not all her anymore. You know what I mean? Like, she's older, she's slower, her body's slower, but her mind's slower too. And you try to have too much of a deep conversation, you realize like she's just parroting back what we're talking about sometimes.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's difficult to see your parents hit that stage of life. Like my parents are still quite young, but you see that in families of patients I take care of at the hospital, and it's a really difficult time. You don't ever want to see your parents like that, and it will come one day.
Yeah, if you're lucky. That's the irony. Damn it! Is that this is the best case scenario? Is you don't die.
Right. Right? Yeah, exactly. How old is she again?
She's 79.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, introduce yourself and we'll start talking.
Yeah. So my name is Nicole, and I live in British Columbia, Canada, in a city called Kelowna. And I'm a registered nurse.
Oh, God, Nicole. Right off the bat, I don't know where the hell you're at. Now I got to figure it out. Hold on a second. You say British Columbia? That doesn't even sound like
Google Map that.
I'm doing it right now. Don't you worry. Oh, you live in Washington State. Just say that.
No,
okay.
No, it's Canada.
Oh, I know, but I'm saying it's right there.
Oh, but yes, we're very close. Yeah. Yes.
Are you close to the US, or are you up more north?
More north.
Because to my eye, this corner of this British Columbia, you're almost in Alaska.
I'm pretty far away from Alaska.
Okay, so you're not that far up. Gotcha.
No.
All right. Okay. All right. So you're like Canadian, like not like that upper part, like the Yukon and that.
Well, actually, now that you say that, I was born and raised in the Yukon.
Really?
So I did live there until I was 17, and that is very northern. And we were an hour and a half away from Alaska. And then when I graduated high school, I got into the nursing program at the University of British Columbia in Kelowna. So then I moved here and I took my training and I never left.
When you said you were born in the Yukon, my first thought, like the question that popped into my head is, how do the ladies' vaginas not freeze when they're having the baby? Literally the first thing I thought. Which is either... Well,
there is modern medicine, so they do go to the hospital for that. But yes, it is very cold there.
Yeah. I mean, that thought right there is either the reason why people like this podcast or the reason why people hate me. I don't know the difference, but...
I think it's why we love you.
Genuinely, my first thought, like, wouldn't they like... just like the labias, and like I had a whole like what, and then the cold air hits it, and what's gonna end? The kids. I have a hard time getting out of bed if the ceiling fan's on. What do you think of that?
Well, and now where I live, it's in wine country, and we this summer we had a heat wave of an average temperature of 46 degrees Celsius. You're going to have to convert that into Fahrenheit for me, but it's very hot.
All right. Well, let's just say this. I have no idea how to convert that to Fahrenheit. So let me just keep going with it was 114 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yes.
In Canada?
Yes.
Did the sled dogs all die? What happened? That's crazy.
In the Yukon, they probably did. Yeah. But yeah, it was quite intense. And I mean, the seriousness of it is that there were some fatalities because, there are some older homes in Canada that don't have air conditioning. And, there's elderly people that just can't, they can't manage those temperatures. It was pretty crazy.
Interestingly enough, two things. Are you on wired headphones?
Yes.
Try not to touch the microphone or let it hit your hair.
Okay. Sounds good.
And the other thing I was going to say was with elderly people, sometimes they don't know they're warm when they're warm.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest problem is they're basically just cooking and they don't realize it until it's too late, really.
Exactly.
And that's really crazy. I have to say that in the Northeast here of the U.S., I mean, I don't know about the rest of the country because I'm not keeping tabs, but it had to have been one of the wettest summers I've lived through in my memory this year.
Wow. And ours was the driest.
No kidding. Yeah, I think we got.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. It just rained and rained and rained and wouldn't stop. And it was inches of rain at a time, not just not just a storm.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. So you're born there up in the, I mean, I'm guessing like the hinterlands is a way to say it. I don't know. What's there like? Did you live in a tree for the first part of your life, or how does that work?
An igloo.
All right, hold on a second. Yukon.
No, I'm just joking.
I love how Canadian you are. You're like, oh, don't take me seriously. I didn't live in an igloo. So, there's buildings. I see it with Google.
Yeah, there's a few buildings there for sure.
Do you know that when I looked down at the map, I learned there's a Gulf of California? I was like, wait.
I don't think I knew that either.
You're goddamn right you didn't. I mean, nobody knows. There's no one listening who knows that. Everyone understands Gulf of Mexico. It's an obvious thing. But
exactly.
Apparently, below San Diego, like California has like I don't want to say a penis. I don't know what it is exactly. There's something sticking down off of California. It's probably another. Hold on. Baja. I know nothing. Okay, so it looks like Baja goes all the way down, almost like midway into Mexico. And then there's this waterway. You knew that?
Well, is that where Cabo San Lucas is, maybe?
Braggart, how do you look at you throwing away? You just throwing names
only
around.
Because I took a vacation there.
Oh, okay. Oh, Cabo San. Yes, it's at the tip of Baja California Sur. It says.
That's right. Yeah.
No kidding. I know nothing about that. I am I swear to you, I am now looking at the map of the United States at the point where it intersects Mexico, and I feel like I've looked down at my foot and seen a sixth toe for the first time in my life.
Well, I'm not the greatest with geography too, but I just seemed to know where Cabo San Lucas was, so I lucked out there.
Was it a good vacation?
It was an awesome vacation.
Okay, well, I mean, you're from the Yukon. Anywhere with a sun, you were probably just like, oh, we're in heaven. Okay, so How old were you when you were diagnosed?
37.
37. Just last year?
Yes, so I was old for this diagnosis.
I was old for this diagnosis. Everyone who's listening who was like 62 when you were diagnosed is like, nah.
Right?
Those people are just happy they figured out how to get their podcast player on one more time right now. You know, and no disrespect to you older people, but you know what happens. They change the operating system and you look at it and you're like, I don't know what this is. You know, why did they move everything? So just last year. So all right, let me dig in a little bit. Not that any of this matters, but I like knowing. Married, children, single?
So I have a boyfriend, and he's also in healthcare. He's a respiratory therapist. So he was along for the ride for this whole diagnosis. We live separately and we have no children, just focused on our careers right now.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So how long have you been dating prior to the diagnosis?
For about 2 years.
Oh, okay. So that's not a new relationship, not an old relationship.
Yes, thankfully not new, because it might have scared him away.
Yeah. You haven't stopped having sex, but you're still doing it more than once a week. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I know how it works. Yeah, I got
You know how it goes.
Oh, please. Right. I got you. It's 2 more years till you're down to hand stuff, and then you just start pretending you can't hear him.
and then you schedule it in, right? Once every 3 months.
You pretend you didn't hear.
Yeah.
I felt like he said, "Let's watch television."
So I turned over and went to sleep. Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I didn't notice. Oops, sorry. Yeah, you've got a couple more years for that even. So a lot of fun. A lot of fun coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hand stuff. It's a descriptive term that really says nothing at the same time.
But says a lot, because everybody knows what that means.
Yeah. No, there's children listening right now that they're like, "Oh, I think I know what that means." So,
yeah, exactly.
And don't tell your parents about this, or you're not going to be able to listen anymore. Just so you know.
Yeah.
I can't stop now. So you were just diagnosed a year ago. So you were like living so out of the blue, or was this something you'd been waiting for?
It's really interesting, because the reason why I find this so fascinating, I only use that word now looking back, but September 15th will be my diaversary, my first diaversary. So coming up here. And, I hadn't felt well for at least a couple of years, but I always, like, leading up to the diagnosis, but I always kind of chalked it up to doing shift work. 12-hour shifts aren't for the faint of heart. Mm-hmm. You really just kind of work, eat, and sleep. And then I started losing my hair, and it was very slow, but it was continuous. And so I did go to my family physician, explaining that I was tired, I'm losing my hair. And he immediately assumed it was thyroid. So I did go for blood work. And my thyroid was actually fine. My iron was low. So he just chalked it up to that.
Okay.
I started on iron supplements, and basically called it a day. And I do have to say that I have the most insane needle phobia. So to just go for blood work it's still not an easy thing, but it really was not an easy thing back then. So to do a bunch of follow-up lab work, I wasn't really that interested in. I thought, okay, my iron's low. I'll just take the supplements and I should be fine. But my energy never returned. My hair continued to be brittle and thinning for sure. And so I just kind of left it at that. I did get some blood work done in 2018. And it was more because I thought, I'm getting a little bit older and I'm in healthcare. I know it's good to have a baseline of all of your, lab values. Mm-hmm. So I did go and get blood work at that time, and my fasting glucose was 8.5. So that is, I have a conversion graph up here for you.
Oh, thank you.
That's 153.
Okay. You have diabetes.
It was elevated for sure. And when my family doctor called me to follow up on that, I had said, well, my extreme stress for lab work. And I also had popped a piece of gum before I went because I was fasting and my mouth was dry. So we kind of both agreed that it was because of that. And it never was followed up on. And I think that the golden rule of the lab work that is out of the normal range is to repeat it. Mm-hmm. It really should have been repeated, and it wasn't. And I didn't mind that because I really don't like needles. So that brings me to the start of the pandemic. And of course, that was an extremely stressful time to be in healthcare and working at the hospital. And I worked on a small medical unit. And we were actually notified one day that our whole unit was just going to close, and we were going to be redeployed to work the COVID ward. Mm-hmm. So this is when nurses in Italy were dying from COVID because we actually didn't know what PPE we required. We didn't know the severity of COVID. So all we knew here in Canada was in Italy, nurses and healthcare professionals were dying from COVID.
I see.
So the stress was just extreme.
Did you go to work every day thinking I'm gonna die today, or
I thought I was going to die of COVID. I just didn't know when.
Okay.
So yeah, it was really stressful. Of course, we never ever had any issues with PPE at our hospital. We did conserve our PPE, but we were never denied PPE. So I was very lucky that way. I know it wasn't like that for everybody in healthcare at that time. And 6 months leading up to September 15th of 2020, working the COVID ward, I started to rapidly lose weight. But it's really interesting because, again, it's so fascinating for me as a registered nurse how I didn't really pick up on all of these signs. And it was basically, there were so many things that were an excuse for what was going on. So I am pretty healthy, but I decided to really, cut out all fast food. I didn't want to be exposed to people handling my food, increase my water intake. I just started to be really healthy, making all of my own food, all of my own bread, but I was rapidly losing weight. Okay. And I just thought it was because I was starting to eat really clean. Mm-hmm. And of course I was thirsty, extremely thirsty, but that's because I was wearing a mask all day at work. And every time you have to go out in public, you're wearing a mask and it makes you feel dry. So, and then you feel dry. So you're drinking extra water and then you're peeing more. So, these are all the symptoms of diabetes, but
you just kept
I would have never, ever thought I had diabetes.
You just kept coming up with reasons why it wasn't. The parents did
so many reasons. Yeah. And, if I wasn't working in a pandemic with all this extra stress, I think it would have been a little bit more apparent to me. The other thing is being 37, I briefly thought maybe I have type 2 diabetes, even though I'm very petite.
Right.
But I have a grandpa who has type 2 diabetes. And I quickly just dismissed that. Like, there's no way. I'm a healthy weight. I eat clean. Like, there's just no way. So over the next few months, I started to kind of write down my symptoms on my notepad in my iPhone. And I thought, I have to make a doctor's appointment because I am really thin. Like, by the time I was diagnosed, I was down to 104 pounds and my baseline is 120. So anyway, I had all these things written down to talk to my doctor about. And I went into work one day and I couldn't stay awake. And I was doing everything to stay awake. I was falling asleep during our nursing rounds. And I can't even tell you still to this day what compelled me to ask my coworker to check my blood sugar, because I hate those finger pokes. Yeah. So for me to even ask somebody to do that to me, I think I knew, but I was in denial. And what I thought was type 2 diabetes, because I was craving sugar at this point. I was drinking orange juice from the nursing patient fridge. I was baking and eating all of the baking. My boyfriend wouldn't even know that I was baking, but still losing weight. So I kind of thought it was awesome at the time. I could eat whatever I wanted all of a sudden and I wasn't gaining weight.
Yeah. I'm laughing for how many people I remember have said that to me.
And I just still kicking myself. Yeah. How did I not know? And so, September 15th, actually the 14th, I called in sick for work because I woke up in the morning to get ready for work and my legs felt like they were literally 100 pounds each. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't get going. So I ended up calling in sick for that shift. The next day I felt the same, but I forced myself to go into work. And in the afternoon, I got my coworker to check my blood sugar. And let me look at the graph here. It was 504.
Ooh. While you were talking, I Googled, I thought to myself, there's definitely a saying that doctors are the worst patients, but I wasn't 100% sure it was a real saying. So then I Googled doctors are, and it's the second return. Overrated is the first return, which I think.
Yes.
Doctors are overrated. Doctors are the worst patients. Doctors are heroes. Doctors aren't scientists. That's what comes up when you Google doctors are. Because I just kept thinking, like, people are listening and thinking, if you don't know, who the hell's going to know? Like,
yeah. Well,
right?
and I'm a registered nurse, but I mean, at the same time, I should know as much about diabetes as a general practitioner.
Is that really true, though? They don't teach you much about it in school, right?
No, and that's what I wanted to talk about is just this whole process just blew me away as each step started to take its place in this diagnosis for me. So she checked my blood sugar and it was 504. And our rule of thumb is to wash your hands and check it again.
Yeah. In case you got an entire Coca-Cola into that test strip.
At this point, yeah, and I wouldn't have even known that at the time.
I just have to say, it really is. It's that moment you're just like, okay, well, obviously I have diabetes, but let me just wash my hands in case.
It was, Scott.
Yeah.
It really was. Yeah. And again, I'm thinking type 2. Right. Type 1 never crossed my mind, not even for 1 second. Because I was eating so much baking. I was making jugs of orange juice. I don't drink juice. I don't drink pop normally. And so this craving for sugar was so strong. And, you know, ultimately that's why I thought, oh, geez, maybe I've pushed myself into type 2 diabetes. So we both laughed. I washed my hands and she rechecked it again. And it was 513. So
did you think
I kind of took,
I'll just wash them 16 more times and see if I can.
Yeah, I really wanted to.
Oh, listen, you're in a dangerous situation going after all those sweets because eventually you're going to end up fighting a bear for honey up there. And then,
right.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be too weak from the DKA. There's no way you're going to be able to do it.
That's where I was at, you know, and I didn't even know. So I kind of just took a deep breath and I sat down at our nursing table and my charge nurse came over and I said, and his name is Scott. And I said, hey, so my blood sugar is 513. And he kind of said, what? And there was one of my favorite doctors sitting at the table too. And that doctor looked at me and he said, hey, Nicole, do you have diabetes? I said, no. And I kind of laughed and he looked at me and he said, you do now. Yeah,
I was going to say, you should have said, not for the next 2 seconds, I don't think, but I think I'm going to, and there it is. Yeah, like
yeah.
That sucks. And that was your diagnosis, huh? Just a doctor sitting at a desk going,
that was it.
Yeah, you have diabetes.
Making what he kind of thought was a joke, but I mean, there's no other explanation really. I mean, except for rare illnesses that would cause your blood sugar to be that high. Mm-hmm. So my charge nurse said, you know, pack your stuff up. We'll head down to emergency and we'll get you in. And I said, no, like I'll finish my shift. And I think this was around 3 p.m. You know, I have 4 more hours to go. I'll finish my shift and I'll just follow up with my family doctor. And he kind of looked at me and he said, you know, give your head a shake. Like something is seriously wrong. We need to go downstairs to emergency. So that's when it all started to kick in.
Yeah.
And I lost it. I completely broke down. And my main concern was that I was going to have to get more needles to find out what was going on. Little did I know my whole life would be surrounded by needles very shortly.
Yeah, no kidding. You just used an idiom that I've never heard before in my life.
What's that?
Give your head a shake.
Oh, you've never heard that?
No.
Maybe it's a Canadian thing.
An imperative to reevaluate one's ideas, behaviors, or actions, or to begin acting or thinking sensibly, primarily heard in Canada.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you said, like, it's funny, I knew what you meant right away, but it was one of those things that in my brain, I had to stop listening to you and go, give your head a shake. What the hell is she? Oh, I get that. Okay. And then I'm Googling because we're being recorded and I'm going to bring it up. So yeah. So your first thought after you recognize, oh hell, this is really what's happening, wasn't about any of the impacts on your life beyond, oh, more people are going to poke me.
Exactly. And anybody who knew me from the time that I formed memories, I have had a needle phobia. And, you know, phobias can be trauma as a young child that you don't really have memories around, but it creates these phobias for you. So that's my whole life. I just thought obviously something happened maybe with immunizations as a baby, and it had, a long lasting impact on me. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't ever a scenario where I remembered having a bad needle from something.
Okay.
I just always had this extreme needle phobia.
No trouble giving them to people?
In fact, I was one of the best. So it's very ironic. And I think I'm more sensitive to the fact that needles aren't fun for anybody. And so I really honed in on that skill as a nurse, and yeah, I perfected it for sure.
So working in that setting, you're poking people in pretty much everywhere, right? You're catheterizing people, you're starting IVs, you're starting all kinds of I'm sure you've gone into someone's neck at some point, right?
I haven't gone into somene's neck because that's more critical care, but I mean everything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted the neck story. Damn it.
Yeah.
Right. Can we just
I refused the neck IV when I went down to emergency.
No, thank you. I'd rather die here. Thank you very much. Wow. So you get down there. Is it what am I wondering here? Is it weird for you because it's where you work? Do you think, what's my better question? When you're younger and you're in healthcare, do you sit there and think, oh God, these things are going to happen to me maybe one day? Or do you have this weird feeling like you're not above it, but immune to it a little bit because you do it?
I don't know why I thought I was invincible, but you do. You eat healthy. I didn't exercise a ton, but I definitely didn't lead an unhealthy lifestyle. And so I never, ever thought I would be diagnosed with a chronic disease ever.
Now, how could you? You're a nurse. That's the feeling,
exactly. Right? We're immune to that.
Makes me think of those 1950s magazine ads where doctors are sitting on the corner of their desk in a long coat, smoking a cigarette, giving you advice. You ever seen that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What you need to do is get some exercise.
Yeah.
Chesterfield King.
Yeah.
It's just very, it's just an interesting situation. I really do always wonder that about healthcare workers. I've said to my wife in the past, that must be the worst job because you're just surrounded with by the ghost of Christmas future constantly.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you not watch people come in, with different ailments, elderly people, watching them get older and just wonder, I wonder which one of these things is going to happen to me.
Yeah. And I mean, definitely as I got older, I started my nursing career when I was quite young, starting to approach my late 30s, you did unfortunately see people starting, to have cancer diagnoses, some pretty critical diagnoses happening in their life. And then it did slowly start getting a little closer to home the older I was getting. Mm-hmm. But you still don't think it's going to happen to you.
Yeah. It must be like being a Formula One race car driver and somebody goes into a wall and explodes and you just think, wasn't me.
Right?
Because how can you not think it's not going to be you at some point?
I know. And I don't know why I ever thought that either. It's not like there's any health issues. There's health issues that exist in my family and in my genetics. But you still, maybe it even has nothing to do with being a nurse. That's how you grow up. You don't ever think something's going to happen to you. Unless I guess you're a pessimist all the time, but
I just imagine it's one way or the other, that you either sit there thinking when is one of these things going to happen to me? Or you have that invincible feeling of it's going to happen to me. I'm a race car driver. We don't crash.
Yeah.
People crash going to work, not me. I know how to drive this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But are nurses inherently any healthier than anybody else that you know?
No.
No.
So, we're your average person. I mean, yeah, we're not necessarily the healthiest of people just because we're in healthcare, and especially doing shift work, just to know what that exposes you to for chronic diseases later on in your life.
It raises your ability to get type 2 diabetes pretty significantly.
Yes.
Shift work's bad for you.
Yes, it's extremely bad for you. It's definitely a risk factor for chronic diseases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no kidding. So, all right. So now you're there, and was it weird being helped by by coworkers?
Yes. This is the whole thing that I still have trouble. And I've been getting ongoing counseling for this to help process just the diagnosis and everything over the last year. But yeah, I mean, here I am in my scrubs still, laying in a bed as a patient in emergency, being told that I have diabetes. And it's so surreal. I still have not been able to fully process that. Like, just what are the chances that I'm working as a nurse 1 minute and the next minute I'm a patient in a bed at the same hospital?
Yeah, that usually only happens like on ER or Grey's Anatomy. Or like where you get hit by a helicopter walking to your car or something like that, which I think has happened on every medical show I've ever seen in my life. Eventually they get like 8-10 seasons in and they're like, we should have the medevac helicopter crash into one of the doctors. Like, it's
that's why I can't even watch those shows.
You don't think that's real? Everyone's not, wait a minute, hold on. Don't lie to me. Everyone's not having sex in every closet?
No, it's really not happening. Maybe the odd couple of people, but yeah.
Disappointing as hell. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, sorry.
Really is. It really is disappointing. Before we move forward, I just want to tell people, researchers have found that shift work is linked to an increased risk of heart attacks, ulcers, depression, obesity, high blood pressure, sleep disorders, type 2 diabetes. I mean, good luck. Your body wants to sleep when the sun's down. Exactly.
And plus, they say it shaves about 10 years off of your life as well.
Just 10 years?
Right?
Well, that's great.
We really are giving ourselves to take care of others.
Yeah, but I'm sure you're making like a 8% shift differential, so it's all fine. I mean, the extra $35 a day is probably making a huge difference for you and really changing your life. Definitely. Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So before we started recording, I don't know how we're going to do this, but before we started recording, I was saying to Nicole, in case it doesn't make it into the show, today's a very strange day for me. Nicole and I are recording very late in the afternoon. We were supposed to do this hours ago, but my mom was in the hospital late last night, and I was with her in the emergency room, which is such a strange thing because my wife's like, don't you have to record tomorrow? And I looked and I was like, oh my God, I do, with a nurse who has type 1. And I was like, I spent my whole night in a room with a nurse. I should have asked her if she had type 1. I mean, I probably could have just gotten this out of the way sooner. But so Nicole's really nice. She has the day off and she let this go. But it's in the forefront of my mind, obviously, right now, healthcare. And that thought I had about nurses must be sad, like I had last night, like sitting there and talked to my wife about it this morning when I got up. But it's just a really, really weird timing, like for, as far as this goes. And anyway, I was saying to you at the beginning, I was like, I was having this existential like crisis this morning, speaking to my wife when I got out of bed. And I was like, this is all just bullshit. she's like, what is it? I'm like, the whole thing. I was like, the first 20-25 years, I didn't know what I was doing and I can't even remember them. I said, my knee's been hurting for the last 5 years. My back is stiff. I can't sleep on my stomach anymore because it makes my lower back hurt. How the hell is that possible? Right. So, like these things are happening. You start, I don't know, Nicole, you're a little far from it still, but there'll be a moment in your life where you get up 3-4 o'clock in the morning to go to the bathroom and you'll hit the floor and realize that your ankle's not articulating the way that it's supposed to. And it takes a good 3 or 4 steps to get moving before that works. And I was like, so I said to my wife today, I was like, so your life is just 25 to 45? Like, if you're lucky, that's the sweet spot. And I was like,
you're right.
I'm like, what a ripoff. I mean, really, I said to her, I was like, we got to, right now, like, we got to find a way to retire. I was like, we're done almost. I said, we're almost dead. What are we doing? Like,
yeah.
She's like, what about the kids paying for college? I was like,
yeah.
I don't care.
Student loans.
Yeah, let them do what I did. Struggle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, I mean, I don't really feel that way. I mean, big picture, but it is hard not to, like, you know, see your mom, you know, at an age where you're thinking you're still going to be like living a jet setting lifestyle. And she's like, can someone please bring the sofa closer to me so I can sit down? You know, like that's, it's not, it doesn't feel you full of good feelings. But anyway,
right.
I
Yeah.
digress. I do want to know more about you being diagnosed. So, this can't all be about me being overly tired and my mom going into the hospital last night.
Yeah, I know, that's okay.
So, what did you learn about what you don't know about diabetes being on the other side of it suddenly? If you are currently injecting your insulin and you would like to try an insulin pump, I think it would be worth your time to check out the Omnipod DASH. You can do that at omnipod.com/juicebox. The website gives you a lot of flexibility. You can check into your eligibility for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH, and you can see if your insurance covers it. But let's talk again for a second about a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH. This is unprecedented. You get the pump for 30 days if you're eligible, and you can try it, wear it, and see what you think. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul, no big deal, no pressure. Just give it a shot. And if you do like it, it's simple to keep going. And then there's that Omnipod Promise. And that's a simple one. That says that when you're eligible, you can upgrade to Omnipod's latest and greatest technology. And you know what I'm talking about, right? The Omnipod 5. We just had a big episode about it recently. The FDA has cleared the Omnipod 5. It's rolling out now. And you can let Omnipod know you're interested. Omnipod.com/juicebox5. You can do that if you want to go tell Omnipod that you're interested in knowing more about the Omnipod 5 when it's available to you. You can do that at my link as well. So you can get started with the Omnipod DASH. You can get the regular old Omnipod if you want. And you can let Omnipod know you're interested in algorithm-based pumping with their Omnipod 5 product. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Omnipod.com/juicebox5. No matter which pump you choose, tubeless is the way to go. My daughter has been using the Omnipod since she was 4 years old, and she's about to turn 18. She's been wearing an Omnipod every day for all of those years, and it has been absolutely fabulous for her and her type 1 diabetes. If you're using insulin and you need an insulin pump, check out the Omnipod. If you've been looking for my Diabetes Pro Tip series and can't find it, it's right there in your podcast player. It starts at episode 210. And if that's hard for you to find, all right, I understand. Why don't you head over to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on, right at the top, it says Diabetes Pro Tip. It'll show you all of the episodes in the Diabetes Pro Tip series and the Defining Diabetes series. You can actually listen to them online or just get the episode numbers there so you know what to look for in your podcast app. And now I get you back to Nicole. There's just a tiny bit more music and then we're just talking again.
Everything, you know, it's just, it's so incredible. And you know, what's even more ironic is that my shift leading up to, sorry about the background noise there.
I didn't hear anything. Was somebody killing a moose outside or what?
Okay, perfect. No. They're rolling in the big metal garbage bins at my condo building. It always makes such a big noise.
Please don't ruin the illusion, Nicole. Could you just say a penguin attacked your window or something like that, please?
And my igloo's melting now.
Did you look up and a polar bear was trying to break your window with a penguin like it was a rock? Could you say something fun?
I love this.
Yeah, say something fun, would you please? Jesus.
But man, that's so funny.
The metal cans are coming up to my condo.
It was the Sled Dog team outside.
It sounds like you live in a completely lovely place. You're ruining the only thing I think about Canada. All right. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. You know, all of a sudden you're sitting in that bed and someone who, by the way, I'm imagining 5 seconds before this, you thought of as a really great nurse is all of a sudden showing that she don't know much about what's happening to you.
Yeah. And, you know, when I had the blood work done, and it was actually a resident who came in to talk to me and said, you know, you have diabetes and you are in severe DKA. And leading up to going down to emergency, I had a young girl who I had just transferred out of ICU up to my medical ward. She was in ICU with DKA because she, you know, whatever social factors were going on in her life, she just gave up giving herself her insulin. Mm-hmm. So, you know, here I was questioning her on why she did that, and, you know, making sure that we were getting her blood glucose in range and making sure that she had all her insulin and, you know, at home when she was ready to be discharged, and that she had everything organized. And all of a sudden it's me in DKA within 3 hours of having that patient. And it's just, I can't even tell you how crazy it is to be on the other side so quick and still in my nursing scrubs. So the resident comes in and says, I have diabetes, and then basically leaves. And I'm just a basket case. And my boyfriend had just worked a night shift the night before. So he was pretty tired. And obviously I phoned him and said, you need to come to the hospital right now. So it did take him a little bit of time to get there because he had to try to wake up and, you know, be safe to drive. And, anyway, so the ICU specialist doctor came in, we called them our intensivists, and, said, we're going to be transferring you to ICU. And it's still, every single thing they said to me was just like, me, like, I'm going to ICU. Like, normally it's one of my patients. Mm-hmm. And never have being sick or in the hospital a day in my life. It was so much to take on. And I said, okay, well, when am I starting metformin, or glyburide, or, you know, which are medications to treat type 2 diabetes, and they're tablets, not needles. So he looked at me and he just said, you have type 1 diabetes. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, Nicole, and he knows me. And he said, you have type 1 diabetes. And it wasn't until the next day that I stopped asking when I could switch from my insulin infusion, because they immediately put me on an insulin infusion, when I could switch from that to my metformin. And the other intensivist just, he was very, very serious. And he said, this is type 1 diabetes. You will be on insulin for the rest of your life.
What were you, looking back, do you know what you were doing right then? Were you in shock, disbelief?
I was in total shock. Yeah. I couldn't even process it. I really, really couldn't. And by the time I got to ICU, my blood sugar was 603. Yeah. So, you know, they all told me that if I had gone home that night, living alone, sleeping alone, I probably wouldn't have woken up the next morning, and the way things were going.
And cutting you slack for being in DKA, that should have been your first thought when you saw your blood sugar. Your first thought.
It should have.
Like, what would you have done if I came in there, you tested my blood sugar, and it was 514?
I would have called the doctor stat.
Yeah, because I
said we have some serious problems.
And this guy here with type 1 diabetes, and he thinks he's going to go home, work 4 more hours, and then come back tomorrow. Like,
this is the state of shock, right?
Yeah,
like, you're not. Yeah. It's just, I'm still pretty speechless. It's just the way it all happened. And, you know, part of counseling was, going over how crazy this all was, being a nurse, and then like immediately on the flip side, being a patient. And, you know, the way that I look at it and the way that I've been kind of talking with my counselor to work through it is that if I wasn't there that day, it wouldn't have probably worked out as well as it did. meaning that I could have easily not woken up the next morning.
You were that bad, poorly off at that point. Cause that's not the highest blood sugar I've ever heard at diagnosis for certain.
Definitely me neither. I mean, I've heard of people coming in the high 40s, which on this graph is 720. Or that's 40 is 720.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of that. So, I was really lucky to have caught it when I did and not have gone a couple more days like that, even if I was able to stay alert and awake. Just the damage that it does,
How long were you in the hospital?
So I spent 3 nights and 4 days at the hospital and just 1 night in ICU.
Okay.
And then transferred.
So here are my questions about that. Were there goals for you? What were their goals for you about your blood sugar? I'm sure they were trying to bring you down slowly to get you stabilized. But
yes.
But was that all done through IV, or when did you begin using injections of your own?
So that was all through the IV while I was in ICU. And our rule in Canada here is that you cannot be running IV insulin on a general medical ward because it's a critical medication, especially given through the intravenous. And so within 24 hours, I was transferred up to a medical ward and that infusion was stopped. And, then began my first dose of insulin. And it was a production. I'm not going to lie. And that whole night leading up to that, I had hourly lab work and hourly glucose testing, finger pricks. I definitely reached my maximum level of coping by the next morning and started refusing lab work.
Did you really?
I did. The needles were so overwhelming to me. That basically was what I was focused on for the first 24 hours, if you can believe it or not. But that's how bad my phobia was. So to have these hourly blood work was very taxing on my system. And I knew my numbers were coming down and I knew that they were looking way better. And so I did refuse two sets of lab work before the intensivist came in that morning. And I just basically told him, like, I can't do this. And he told me I have to do this.
Yeah,
basically.
What did you think when you said, I can't do this? Did you think I'll die? That's fine. Or did you think there was another way out of this? Were you bartering? What was that?
Yeah, I think it was somewhat of a barter because we did come to the conclusion that, okay, he said to me, I agree, you're borderline, but your numbers are looking way better. We can probably call you stable. And why don't we do blood work every 4 hours? So I said, deal, basically. I can handle that. Meanwhile, my boyfriend, who works in ICU, is a respiratory therapist all the time, is kind of shaking his head, like telling me that I'm not the one calling the shots anymore.
Yeah. You gotta kind of shut up and let them do it. Did you?
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you have that feeling like, oh, I can still run the show here?
I did feel that a little bit.
Yeah.
Just with so many years of nursing, it just was so weird to relinquish control to the people that I worked with to take care of me.
So I've said this out loud enough. I'm not scared to say it again, but I've gotten pushback and I've gotten people to agree with me. I've said that of the great number of parents who are parents of kids with type 1 that are nurses, most of them end up being bad at it in the beginning. And I think there's something about the art that there is to giving insulin and that they want it to fall into very strict rules and guidelines. Like almost like, I don't know, I can't figure it out completely, but it almost feels like to a nurse, diabetes is check, write down the number, count these carbs, do the math, give the insulin. That's diabetes. And then when they see it in their real life, where they can actually watch it on a glucose monitor and they realize it's not going the way they anticipated, or that it's not just so I don't want to call it throwaway, but I imagine if you have a
like cut and dry.
Yeah, very cut and dry. Like, oh, I gave you your medication. You ate your food. I came back 3 hours later and your blood sugar was 350. Oh, well, I'll do another mathematical equation. And I'll give you more insulin instead of it feeling like, oh God, I'm killing my kid, or, oh Jesus, I'm killing myself. Like, right. There's a disconnect there, and it shines a light pretty brightly in my in my thinking on how little emergency medical, and I do say hospitals are still an emergency, right? You're only going to be there for a couple of days. It's not long-term care. Knows about like the real back room of diabetes and using insulin. I don't think anybody really understands it at all.
No. And this is kind of the shock that I went through for the next few days and anger was, as a registered nurse, how little I knew about type 1 diabetes. And, I have to say over the last year, of course, I've done so much reflecting. One of the main reasons is because, in my opinion, I didn't take care of very many type 1 diabetics in my 15 years at the hospital. It was mostly type 2s because type 1 diabetics have a somewhat immediate effect of not taking care of their blood glucose. Type 2 diabetics have a very delayed kind of effect, of losing their limbs and their eyesight. And type 1 diabetics, if you give too much insulin, right away. If you don't give enough, right away. Type 2s, it just seems to be much different.
Yeah. So one set of circumstances comes up on you quickly and feels pretty dire, and the other one seems like a tale of what might happen to you because it happens to some people, but everybody gets to have the feeling you had, which is it won't happen to me, so I'm okay, and then you get to ignore it because of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and just to even know, my first few days when I was at home giving insulin, and then I would eat my supper and then I would get up and clean the dishes and have a severe hypoglycemia. And it was just absolutely shocking to me how much I didn't know about type 1 diabetes, and even my type 2 patients who I would give a large amount of insulin to, fast acting insulin, and then they would leave the ward and go for a cigarette smoke outside the hospital or something.
Yeah.
And for me to never, ever have been taught in my training that maybe they should hang around for a little bit because they could have an immediate response to the amount of insulin I just gave them. But you don't see that as a nurse. You don't know that as a nurse. The hospital doesn't manage diabetes very well either. They're giving me cookies and crackers and things like that for snacks, fruit cups that are in sugary syrup. It really, really was astonishing to me. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. And I was on this big campaign of like, I'm going to revamp the nutrition system in the hospital. And I'm going to, this is in my first few months of the diagnosis. Of course, now I realize I don't have time to battle that, but that's a much bigger political issue. But,
well, you're also lucky about what part of Canada you live in, because what kind of insulin did you get when you left?
So I was started on Basaglar, which is Lantus, for long acting, and then Novo Rapid Aspart insulin for my fast acting. And I'm still on that.
There are places in Canada where they would give you regular and MPH.
Yes, there is. And when I first started nursing, that's exactly what it was. And we were drawing them out of vials. And now the hospital's gone to pens.
It's interesting. I mean, you're using there's a last generation of insulin being used still in parts of Canada and parts of America too, by the way. But
yes.
But that's even fascinating. So tell me a little bit about, well, actually, this is going to sound really strange, Nicole. I have to call my mom and then I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. This doesn't normally happen in the middle of the podcast, but we're in a specific situation here. You're likely going to hear something that won't be in the show, but give me a second. She just tried to call me.
Yes, God.
Hey, Mom.
Okay. What's that? What are those things called?
Well, wait. Hold on one second. Did Bob get a hold of you?
No.
Okay, so we thought maybe it would be better for you to not have to go to the doctor tonight because of how tired you were. So he canceled the appointment and he has it set up for, they're going to call, let's see. He said, I canceled the appointment for tonight. The doctor is going to get a referral and call him back. So we're going to skip going to your general and just get the referral to the specialist.
Okay. Did he say where the specialist is located, or?
Bob's waiting for the phone call back to get the answer to that.
Oh, okay.
All right. So you should get ready for bed and get something to eat and sleep. Okay.
I can't go. I can't go in that bed. It's really comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sleeping for about an hour, but then I woke up and had to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And I got up, but I couldn't get out of bed because it was the same as the couch is, soft in the middle, and you can't get out of it right.
So you're going to sit in your chair?
I think that's what I'm going to do, yeah, because
Okay.
that's what I'm doing right now, sitting in a chair.
All right. Well, did you see I put yogurt and all kinds of food in there? I got you frozen meals that'll be easier. They have some carbs in them, but they're not bad. So I got you like 3 dinners and a bunch of breakfasts. I bought more eggs, though you didn't need them. And I filled your refrigerator up with a lot of different stuff.
Right, I saw it was filled.
Okay.
I didn't get a chance to see all it was, but I saw that it was filled.
Did you look in the freezer as well?
No, I didn't. I didn't even look in the freezer.
Take a look in there. You think you could eat something?
Probably.
Yeah, I would try to eat something. Do you have a drink with you?
I have like a little bit of water. I have a Gatorade that's sitting there.
Good. Let's pound that Gatorade down. Get it down, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
What did you call about? What was your question?
I wanted to know what the product was called. That eggs in a.
Oh, I didn't find. So it's called Eggs in a Cup. If Bob's going to run out for you, tell him to text me and I'll tell him what it is.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Get something to eat. I'm going to call you in a little bit. Okay.
Okay, honey.
All right. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Love you.
She sounds adorable.
Do I need to even tell her that she was on the podcast? I think legally she's my mom. I don't even have to worry about it. I mean, she's not going to.
She sounds good.
She's doing it. Listen, she's been asleep for like 3 hours in the last 36 hours. So she could be high as a kite too. Like, who knows? Just like out of her
She
mind.
could be.
I'm so sorry that I really, it's not normally what happens when I'm making the podcast, but
it just feels like a day at work. It feels normal to me.
yeah, it was so nice to see the nurse, who's probably about your age, work with my mom last night. And she just caught me in the hallway and she's like, this stuff happens to older people. Like, it was so just like, it almost echoes what we're talking about, because to her, it was sort of like, oh, don't worry, this happens. And to me, I'm like, Mom, my mom's dying. You know what I mean? Like, it's
totally
right. You have these two different perspectives. Not that a nurse, I mean, honestly, how could you be an effective clinician of any kind if you were feeling everybody's tragedy on a personal level every 15 minutes, right? You can't do that. All right, so in your opinion, the lack of knowledge from nurses and doctors, what was the harm to you as a newly diagnosed type 1? What was their lack of knowledge? How did their lack of knowledge harm you?
That's a really good question. How do I answer that? It really basically left managing this disease with zero education. I'm walking out of the hospital with literally zero education. I did see a diabetic nurse, but there's one diabetic nurse for our whole hospital. And so she quickly came up and said, this is the insulin you're going to get started on. And do you have benefits? Okay, perfect. You have extended benefits, so it should cover that. And you'll have a follow-up with us once you're discharged. And that was my diabetic consultation. So I immediately took charge. As soon as I was discharged home, I reached out to so many different resources. My sister is also, she has her PhD in clinical psychology.
Okay.
And she has one more year of internship, and then she's ready to start working, start her practice. So of course she was very involved. We have a very close family, and she immediately reached out to her resources and found this type 1 diabetic group for BC for British Columbia that supports mental health. And it's basically like a peer support program. So I immediately joined that. And my nursing friend, who I actually went to nursing school with, who is around the same age as me, she's been a type 1 since she was 16 years old. I immediately reached out to her, and she actually became my, what I joke as my personal diabetic nurse. I was able to message her, call her at any time. She put in my first Libre glucose sensor because I was afraid to do that on my own. I sourced out all my own support and was able to get education through those resources I found. But here I am being discharged. When we give insulin in the hospital, it's a critical medication. And we have to do what's called a blind double check. So I dial up my insulin for what I think my patient needs based on their glucose. And I show my coworker what their glucose is, but I don't show them what I've dialed up the insulin to. And they're supposed to come to that same dosage that I came to. And then we both sign for the medication. So all of a sudden I'm being discharged home, having to give myself insulin, and nobody's double checking it. Like, it's really, really unnerving.
How many times
to know how critical it is?
How many times in a clinical setting did you dial up one thing and the person you checked with disagreed with you?
Oh, maybe twice in my career.
Okay. Is that enough to make you scared personally?
Yeah.
That's funny.
It was.
Yeah. So silly, but I understand. So you have any
and just the exercise, just the movement, Scott.
Yeah.
Nobody ever told me, or did I ever read or ever know, that after you give fast acting insulin, and I think this is fairly common amongst type 1s, the closer to giving that insulin that you move around, even just go for a simple walk, the more at risk you are for hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No one ever told me that. So here I am trying to do dishes, and I'm ending up on the floor sweating, thinking, what's going on? And then I check my blood sugar, and, you put 2 and 2 together. But I mean, really, carb counting, we don't carb count as nurses in the hospital. I know nothing about that.
Interesting.
We just go by a scale on what that patient's blood sugar is and give their insulin according to that. So, it really was shocking to me how much I didn't know.
Well, what you said was that you created a group of people around you to help you, and you had resources because you're a nurse. But
yes,
but your resources still didn't help you that much because you're sweating on the floor while you're doing dishes. And the bigger question to me is, what is everyone else supposed to do? You knew people.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you?
So this group that I joined, it's actually called the T1 Huddle Group. For any listeners that are in British Columbia, it's run by Dr. Tricia Tang, and it's really such a wonderful group. We use WhatsApp to message each other, and we just there's an ongoing chat conversation. We can ask anything in the chat. And you've got a group of people here to support you, from newly diagnosed to, going on 60 years with diabetes. Mm-hmm. And I was really lucky to have my friend who had been type 1 for so long.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Facebook group that I put together for the podcast? The private?
Yes, one? I think it did. Oh, is it private? There's
a private group. There's one that I just put up, like something's coming out, but there's a private one that's exactly what you're talking about, except it's, wow, at this point, like well over 14,000 people in there, and like 11,000 of them are active every day. It's fast.
It's amazing. We really need this peer support, because what I also found is that a lot of my clinicians, the diabetic nurses, my endocrinologist, the diabetic nurse at the hospital, they don't have diabetes. So, I mean, they have some level of education and understanding on it, but the lived experience is just night and day from being a clinician to actually having type 1 diabetes yourself.
Yeah. Wow. That's really, I can't agree with that enough. The idea of being able to talk to other people, bounce ideas off them, it takes a while to figure out who you can trust and who doesn't know what they're talking about yet. But if you get if you get a good group, the people who don't know lay back a little bit, and they wait till they figure things out. Like, people don't say, at least in my group, you don't get a lot of people saying the patently wrong thing. You know what I mean? Like, you don't hear like, what color is the sky? And they're like, purple. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. You don't know. It's not like that. Like, sometimes people will say, I think, or I don't know, or in my experience. They use phrasing that helps you understand what their understanding is, which I think is also really valuable. But yes. I've said it a million times here. Like, I started this group because listeners asked me to, and not because I wanted to. And to be perfectly honest, like, being the moderator of a Facebook group is not exactly high on my to-do list of, things I ever wanted to be involved in. But it remains like, it's one of the things I'm prouder of. It's really interesting to watch.
Yeah. And you should be, because just the need, and it's no different in the States than it is in Canada, the need to have that peer support. I'm telling you, this last year of my life, if I did not have that peer support, would have been so much different. Yeah. And the other thing is that I have a regular counselor, clinical counselor that I had seen over the years. But I quickly found out that there isn't actually a psychologist or a registered clinical counselor that is a type 1 themselves in BC. Okay. So I actually, and I don't even know if I should say this, but I'm going to anyway. I actually, through my sister, found a clinical psychologist out of Toronto, Canada, who is a type 1 herself. So she specializes in type 1 therapy.
Wow.
And how important that was to actually do a Zoom call and see her drinking an orange juice or an apple juice while she's counseling me. I can't tell you the connection that creates. And I quickly, once I got over the hump, went back to my regular counselor that I just see the odd time when I need to. And she still even apologizes that she doesn't know anything about type 1 diabetes. So she can try to understand and she can try to relate as much as she can, but it's just not there.
Yeah. I've had a number of therapists on the show who also have type 1, and I find my conversations with them to be really enjoyable. And they have it's obvious different insight. They have real world training in talking to people about troubles, and at the same time they have a deeper understanding of type 1 because they live with it. And not that a regular therapist can help you, but I'd rather have an ex-pro teach me how to pitch than a guy who's just theorizing about it. So
great analogy.
Right, yeah. Somebody really knows the ins and outs and the pitfalls and things that other people just would never know about. Your whole story is an example of that, right? Like, you think you have people there who know what they're talking about, and there's no way for them to, and that leaves you with a lot of deficits then.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not their fault. Like, we talk and joke and mess around all the time about doctors not really understanding type 1 diabetes and everything. But the truth is, like, how could they? Like,
it's not in their training. And the nutrition that goes with it isn't either, because I reached out to one of my friends who's a doctor at the hospital that I worked at, and, told her what my A1C was when I was diagnosed, which was 11, by the way, and I've gotten it down to 5.7. Oh. But, I went for a walk with her one day, and I said, I'm going to half bolus for my lunch, and then I'll go for a walk with you. And she didn't even really understand that concept. And to think of how many years they spend in training, and she didn't even know that basic concept of type 1 diabetes. It just really fascinated me. It makes me angry at the same time, but it really fascinated me.
Yeah. But how could she really know unless she would live with it?
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And, I guess type 1 diabetes is a specialty that goes to an endocrinologist. And I know that family physicians, general practitioners can't know everything about every disease, right? So I do understand that part. But I think type 1 diabetes, from what I've heard over the last year, I think may be coming more and more people diagnosed with it. They're almost saying that they're seeing this post-COVID in some individuals, and people are getting diagnosed later in life. Because I found that really fascinating about myself as well. Like, why me? Why at 37?
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? But and my personal opinion on that is that obviously I was born with the genetic predisposition to have type 1 diabetes, and the stress of working through a pandemic ultimately, again, in my own opinion, is what brought out my disease. Because I had no viral infection. I had no, nothing like that happen leading up to it.
Yeah. But you did say you were panicked about COVID.
I've never felt that kind of stress in my life. And I think that was very taxing on my immune system.
Yeah. You might have ended up being one of those ladies that gets it at 60 years old or something like that. Had that not happened.
I very well could have, Scott. I do believe that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't want to say fun, but it's interesting to muse about and wonder about out loud, like, what it is that, kind of pushed you over the edge like that.
I know. I wish there was a test for it, but we'll never know. You can just kind of theorize.
Yeah. Type 1 in your family or other, how about like celiac, thyroid, I don't know, stuff like that in your family, bipolar, anything like that in the line?
So no type 1. I have grandpa who is type 2 on my maternal side, and my father and I think his mother have hypothyroid. So at the same time as getting type 1, I quickly realized my thyroid function was poor as well. So I do have hypothyroidism as well. That it basically went hand in hand within that first week of diagnosis.
I have been waiting to get back to that because the brittle hair thing was not the diabetes, and it wasn't the low iron. So
nope.
That was definitely the thyroid. Yeah.
But it wasn't showing up on my TSH yet, which is really fascinating. Like, I wish I could talk at length with my endocrinologist, like, well, what about this? What about that? How does this work? How does that work? Because I clearly was sick for a couple of years. I clearly was, but nothing really obvious was showing up in my lab work. So somehow, my body was compensating
Nicole,
for as long as it could.
Let me run something off the flagpole here and see if anybody salutes. Okay. They're going to tell you that in range for TSH, some doctors will tell you we don't treat till 8 or 10, right? Like,
wow.
But I'm going to tell you that over 2, you have thyroid issue.
Yeah. And that is really interesting. So, right. I mean, I was like 2.63 or something like that when I was in the hospital, and then quickly went to 4 point something and felt awful, super cold. I mean, my hair was coming out in handfuls.
What number did they give you medication at? When did they finally say you have hypothyroidism?
At 4.6, I would say.
Did they scan your thyroid to see if you have Hashimoto's?
No. And, I've never brought that up with my endocrinologist, but obviously I've learned about that on your podcast. I learned so many things on your podcast. I haven't had a chance to say that yet. I mean, it's incredible. You really are a celebrity in the type 1 world. And I can't thank you enough for having this podcast. It was one of the first things I was told to start listening to by a pure type 1.
Nicole, you can butter my bread in a couple minutes when we say goodbye. Yeah. But just hold on a second. Like before that, I'm going to tell you, Dr. Scott would have been giving you a hormone replacement back with the hair and the 2.6. At 2.6, based on only what I've learned on this podcast and through my personal goings-ons with my family members, 2.6, I would have said you have hypothyroidism, and we're going to start you on a low level of Synthroid. Like I would have, I don't know how to choose it, but I would have figured it out. Like the amount, I'm sure it's something to do with weight. We could have figured it out with Google. Anyway, I'm saying you would have been there and done. Like you
exactly, and especially based on symptoms. Like it doesn't always have to be about lab values when you treat something.
Yeah, if for everyone listening, thyroid related, treat the symptoms, not the test
Yes.
Please don't treat the number, treat your symptoms. If you have the symptoms and you're 2.5 or 2.8 or 3.1, you have a thyroid issue, and just do it. That's
fight for it. Like your doctor may not agree, but honestly, I am the lived experience of that. And and my hair in the last year, it's amazing how much thicker my hair has gotten. And I can see this, my best friend is my hairdresser, and we joke about it. You can see this line of where my hair started to grow back in. And I mean, Nicole, clinically, I had a normal TSH, but I was suffering.
Insulin's a hormone. Thyroid makes hormones. Your body is not good at dealing with hormones. So,
it's not. Yeah. I just learned that.
Yeah, you figured it all out. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you if there's anything we didn't talk about that we should have.
No, I don't think so. Okay. I just, my whole point for this podcast is just that if there are healthcare professionals listening, I don't even know how to say it, but just, I had a fasting glucose of 8.5. That definitely should have been followed up on. But when you're in healthcare, you somehow, like we were talking about at the beginning, you feel invincible. You feel like nothing is wrong with you. But I think you need to be more open-minded, because I think we can be very narrow-minded, thinking nothing will happen to us. And look where I ended up, right? I had the symptoms screaming in my face. So I think listening to what your body is trying to tell you is so important.
When that doctor saw that number and let you go, do you think that was professional courtesy? Do you think if it wasn't you, the doctor would have pushed harder?
He knew my level of phobia for needles. And, I don't think that it was right that he didn't push for it because he knew I was bothered by needles. I think he should have left it up to me and said, this needs to be followed up on. Whether you go or not is up to you, but I will write the order for a lab requisition that we need to repeat these labs. I think is what should have happened.
But his response was more like, you don't like needles? Okay, forget it. Which makes it dismissive and makes you feel like, well, it must not be that big of a deal if he doesn't care.
Exactly. Because even as a nurse, you still rely on your doctor to take care of you.
You can tell you're Canadian, because if you were American, you'd be suing that guy.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just teasing. Everyone stop being so litigious. But okay. All right. That makes sense. Now's the part where you say great stuff about me. Where did you?
Yeah, no, honestly.
Hold on.
It was.
I feel stupid saying it, but what I really meant was how did you find the podcast, and if it's been valuable for you, can you tell me in what way?
Yeah. So how I found the podcast was as soon as I joined our T1 Huddle Group, is what it's called. This gal who lives about 4 hours away from me, I kind of connected with her, and she was a year into her diagnosis, just as I was diagnosed. So she just she wrote me this really lovely email, and she basically just, step one, you need to do this, which is, apply for the disability tax credit. Step two, you need to contact your vehicle insurer because they need to do a medical exam. Basically, these are all the things you need to do. And in her list was, the Juicebox podcast is a really great resource. So while I was on medical EI trying to sort out my insulin dosages and just learn my new life, I would go for walks every day, which is incredible at managing your blood sugar, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I would listen to your podcast, and the Bold with Insulin. Of course, I think this is a common thing. People love that series. I really became less and less afraid of insulin listening to your podcast, and definitely more motivated to have my blood sugars low. In the beginning, you're okay with having them I closed my tablet here at 10. What would that be? That would be at 180. That's not good. Right. So I think your podcast and my clinicians, they would say, oh, that's great. Anything over 180 should be addressed, but 180 is fine. Well, it's not fine. And being a registered nurse now, I know that. So I think your podcast, it really helped to just better understand things.
I'm glad. Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
And I'm so entertaining that your walks must have just whisked right by.
They did.
Yeah. Do you find me irritating, but the information's so good you just deal with it? I got a review like that the other day, which, by the way, if you're trying to hurt my feelings, it's too late. I've been married for 25 years. You can't touch me. But I love those are my actually, being serious, I don't need a bunch of them, so please don't do this. But to hear that someone doesn't really like me but listens to the podcast because it's so valuable warms my heart a little bit. Like it makes me feel like, wow, the information here is so good. They have to put up with me to get to it. By the way, other people seem to like my personality, but and not that everybody needs to, or that I would expect everybody to. I would expect the exact opposite. But I honestly mean, like, without any sarcasm, if you found a podcast where you're like, oh, I really don't like this host, but the content's so good, I'm going to listen to it anyway. That makes me feel really good about the content. It really does. Like,
and it should.
Yeah, I can't be for everybody. But
no, exactly. That's not how the world works.
I like it when I get like a bad review and it's still a good review when you read it. Like you read it and you're like, wow, this person's mad. They're like, but they still like it. That's interesting. Yeah. And while I think
you put a good spin on it, and I think that a lot of listeners would agree with that. And you kind of normalize it, and you have your experience with Arden, and your sense of humor does put a certain spin on this. I mean, it would be extremely dry if you weren't the host, in my own opinion.
Let me tell you two different things. First of all, I'm way funnier than this. I'm holding it back because if we just drilled down into the mania that is my sense of humor. First of all, a lot of you would be put off. and secondly, you'd be like, I don't know what he's talking about. Because my mind would just explode into weird directions. And I'd start piling on top. Basically, when you think I'm being amusing, I have a cap on myself trying to hold about 80% of my personality in. But I do also believe what you're saying, that one of the reasons this all works is because it's not dry and it's not boring. And it is conversational. And, for the people out there who like to say that I talk too much, to you, I say, shut up. Because, no, I don't mean it like that. Because somebody has to drive the conversation. And,
it's true.
And you don't realize, like, once in a while, I'll hear a critique from people. And so that they know, I actually pay attention. When I do the transcripts for the show, the transcripts tell me what percentage of the time I'm speaking versus what percentage of the time the other person.
Okay.
And I speak usually about 60-40. And if I stay right around 60-40, I feel very good. If I get more 50-50, then I'm like in a Dexcom thing where people are just spewing out information. And if I go much over 63%, even when I listen back, I think, I spoke a little too much today. Like that's interesting. I can feel that. But you guys don't know that sometimes I interview people who still have something valuable to say, but it's not their inclination to speak and pontificate and go on. And if I don't keep prodding them with silliness or questions or etc., they'll just stop talking.
There was one podcast that I'm thinking of when you explain that, and I wish I could remember the title of it, but it was a young gal who was living the vegan life.
Right.
She was on a vegan diet, and she seemed very, very shy, although very sweet, very shy. And I could see you trying to draw this information out of her.
Right.
So if you're not like that podcast wouldn't have been able to post it, really.
No, it would just be silence. And then what would you do? So, and there's another, and the other aspect of it is the entertainment value. Like, people are like, oh, it's entertaining. Well, it's entertaining because I say, because I actually have ridiculous thoughts in the middle of people's serious conversations. And then I say them out loud, and then people go, oh my God, why did he think of that? Like, what do you mean that the Gulf of California, you didn't know it existed? Of course it exists. And I'm looking at it, I'm 50 years old, and I was like, I've never seen that before. So, like that kind of stuff makes it makes it real. And if somebody if somebody made a dry conversation about type 1 diabetes, you wouldn't listen to 10 of them and you'd be done.
It's true.
So I appreciate people who, I also think this. I think that it could rub some adult type 1s a little wrong that I don't have diabetes. And let's just say I completely understand that. But sometimes when I hear from people, there's too much of the host, meaning like I'm giving my opinion too much. I think it would be important if I could meet those people. I would say to them, listen, if you've listened to the Pro Tip series or the Defining Diabetes episodes or any of that stuff, that's all that is a conglomeration of all of my knowledge about type 1 diabetes. So that while we're in a conversation, you and I, and you have type 1 and I don't, if I can still relate some experience I've had that's good for you, like that would be valuable for you, I mean, I have to do that. I can't just sit back and not relate to the person having a conversation. And if I have something that I think is valuable to interject, I hope people would have enough trust in me to know that I'm building a podcast that is fairly popular. Like I'm not just talking to talk. I recognize sort of what needs to be said in that moment. But I do think that I do understand why it would maybe, if I was a type 1 and I was an adult and I was listening to a conversation where somebody with type 1 and somebody without type 1 were speaking, I'd want to hear from the type 1 more myself. I understand why they might feel that way, but
I do a little bit, but I don't know. In your defense, how old was Arden when she was diagnosed?
2.
2?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't know what's going on. You are still the lived experience of type 1 diabetes. You were managing 100% of her type 1 diabetes.
And I've been specifically paying attention in a way that you have to admit is uncommon. So
very uncommon. Like when I started listening to your podcast and how you treat Arden's diabetes, she is so extremely lucky to have had a father like you to be that involved. I can see the benefit for her, delaying or possibly not having any chronic like comorbidities from diabetes because you were on it from the get-go.
That's the hope.
She's incredibly lucky.
Oh, please. I was going to call this episode Hand Stuff with Nicole, but which I still think I'm going to do. But now I might just call it Arden is lucky. And that way she might actually listen to this one day when she gets
older. She might.
Well, listen, in being serious and in my own defense, I did an interview yesterday with a doctor, who, you're going to love. His name's Dr. Adi, Saliati. And when you hear it, he's brilliant about diabetes. Like he really is. And yet while he was talking, I thought these are the things I've been saying for 7 years on this podcast. Like he agrees with me. Like I didn't say, here's what I think. Do you agree with me? I let him say what he thought. And then I was thinking like, wow, that's exactly what I've said about that over and over again on this show. Yeah. And that made me feel good. Like I was like, okay, my stuff is pretty solid, And so, so if somebody hears me talking too much, I get it. Maybe I'm irritating to you or whatever. You wanted to hear from the person with type 1, but I'm not just talking to talk. Although, listen, I record a lot of these. You got to cut me a break if once or twice, a month I just like start babbling away. Like you should try making 600 of these podcasts.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, just say it's free, Nicole. Just say thank you. Like that's
right.
Every review should just say thank you. Stop critiquing me. I don't need this.
Right. No, but there's always going to be someone.
I'm teasing. They're fine. People's thoughts are really valuable. Like I appreciate having them. But if I don't make fun of them, again, we don't have a podcast. What am I just going to sit here and say thank you for your honest feedback? Wow, that's interesting. I got to make it into something. We're talking here. All right, listen, we got to get out of this. You have been too delightful. You've taken up all of my day. I am on a no sleep high that is, I'm going to crash very, very soon. I'm pretty sure. And we might have heard from my mom if I decide not to edit it out. So big day.
Yeah.
Big day.
Yes. Well, get some rest. I appreciate your time with everything going on. And I really hope that things go well with your mom.
You were really kind to put this off all day for me and help me out. I did a lot of very not fun things in the time between when we were supposed to record and when we got to start. So
I can only imagine, and I probably have a good idea of what that included.
I'm assuming you were watching Netflix, but Canadian Netflix is just like big comfy couch and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, is big comfy couch a Canadian thing?
Well, it was a show that my sister watched when we were growing up. I don't know if I might have been a little old for it when it came out, but yeah, I definitely remember that show.
So is Big Comfy Couch, and there's a reason I'm asking this, so if you're still listening, hang on for 1 second. It premiered on March 2nd, 1992 in Canada, and on January 9th, 1995 in the US. This is a Canadian TV show, The Big Comfy Couch.
There you go.
And why did I ask you that? What was the idiom you used earlier? Reshape?
Give my head a shake.
Give my head a shake, which, by the way, you realize is actually going to be the name of the episode, right?
Yeah, perfect.
And
I love it.
When you Google Give My Head a Shake, the first video return that comes back is a song called Give Your Head a Shake on the Big Comfy Couch. And I saw that a couple hours ago while we were talking, and that's what made me say that. So,
oh, I love that.
Yeah. So it's, by the way, YER, Y-E-R. You guys don't live
it is.
Yeah, you guys don't live that far from here. Why are you so different?
That seems like slang.
Aren't you being ruled by a monarch or something like that, or do I not understand?
I think we are, but I don't really understand that either.
Oh, it would be so easy to take over the world. Nobody pays attention to anything.
I know.
First, I'd like to thank Nicole for coming on the show and sharing her story. And then I'm going to thank Touched by Type 1. Don't forget you can find them at Instagram, Facebook, or at touchedbytype1.org. They really are doing amazing stuff. You should go check them out. Another thank you to Omnipod for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Find out more about that free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH at omnipod.com/juicebox. And if you'd like to let Omnipod know that you're interested in that Omnipod 5, it's omnipod.com/juicebox5. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with someone who you think might also enjoy it.